More than 250 experts in the traffic signals industry joined together in person to hear a range of papers here in Nottingham. These recordings are brought to you by AGD Systems, Colas, SRL Traffic Systems, Smart Video and Sensing, Vivacity and Unex Traffic.
Thanks everyone. So as Neil said, I'm Andy Wiseall, joined by my colleague Golnaz. So I'm the Network Performance Delivery Manager at Transport for London. So we essentially look after all of the UTC systems in London. We're the end user for all of our suite of traffic modelling. And we use those tools and those systems to affect change on the network. So by the medium of traffic signal timings. And you've heard some of my colleagues talk about the timing review program that we have, and we've talked about that in previous symposiums. As Neil said, I'm here as a follow-up to last year. Last year I presented with my colleagues Helen Kanzik and Susie Kerry, and we talked about this sort of early stages of London's recovery from the pandemic, something called the London Street Space Plan. And I'm here today to essentially give an update a year on. It's been a whirlwind of change, as I'm sure it has been for lots of authorities. So just a brief sort of recap on last year. So London Street Space Plan, suite of emergency measures. Lots of us got these emergency measures to introduce across the nation. Principal aims, as it says on the screen at the moment, principally to enable people to be more socially distant, to give them that space, to take space from what was previously road-dominated areas through town centres, to give space over to pedestrians, to give space over to cyclists, to enable them to enable people to have more options where public transport options are less viable. We're actively encouraging people not to use the tube. We were actively encouraging people not to travel on bus if they could avoid it. And so creating space for people to walk and cycle is vitally important. And all that is to enable London to avoid a car-based recovery, avoid that sharp uptick in cars that would be disastrous from a London perspective as it would be disastrous from a national perspective. And then also to just keep us on an upward trajectory, on an improving trajectory in terms of London's air quality. And we've done schemes that are large and small. We've done them at glamorous locations and non-glamorous locations. There are schemes that are on small roads that allow restaurants to spill out onto the road, onto what was previously the road, to have more outdoor dining instead of indoor dining. But equally, we've set ourselves challenges. We've got a new cycle lane on Park Lane. We've got a new cycle lane on Euston Road. So we've done big schemes, we've done small schemes, and everything in between. Right. So as I said, it's been one of the fastest paced programmes that TfL and the 33 London boroughs have ever been faced with. We've had new measures such as, I mean, sure, you'll have seen in the news and you'll be experiencing these as well. We've seen low traffic neighbourhoods. We've seen school street type schemes. In my department alone, we think we've made over 5,000 individual signal timing changes throughout the pandemic period, ranging from changes to help ambulances move around the capital in the early phases, so enabling those trips to and from the Nightingale Hospital, to helping people to walk around the capital by lowering the cycle times of pedestrian crossings, make those crossings come in more frequently. And now as the network recovers, as we're starting to see more flow on the network, as we're starting to see disruption increase on the network, the shift has been more towards the sort of traditional approach from the department, focusing on bus journey times, focusing on where those bus journey times could be improved, and applying the type of techniques that Mike and Chris talked about earlier to try and squeeze as much as we can out of the network to help people moving around the network by bus. Right, so a little bit of a sort of introduction of what we've done. We've got 93 more kilometres of cycle lane around the network in London. It's not the all singing or dancing cycle lanes that we've got along places like the Embankment. And if you look at the Embankment on London's on TfL jam cams, if you type that into Google, you can access some of the CCTV feeds along there, and you'll see lots of platoons of cyclists going along the Embankment. It's not like that, but it's providing cyclists what they need. It's that safe segregation away from the traffic, that is more attractive to cycling, to people choosing to cycle. But yeah, and we've done it through we've done that segregation through pole cones, through barriers, and even white paint in some cases. Right, we've got 88 new low-traffic neighbourhoods at the time of talking. We've got 335 school streets that are closed to traffic during school opening and closing hours. You know, it's fair to say that those low-traffic neighbourhoods have not been flavour of the month everywhere, and there's an asterisk on the slide that shows some have been removed. You know, we've had some authorities. You know, I give an example of one local authority. I think in the week before lockdown hit first time around, we had a lorry go into a candle shop, if you can believe, in London. You know, and that building was structurally unsound. The scaffolding went up, the temporary lights went up outside. But whilst the insurers couldn't get to that building to repair it, a low-traffic neighbourhood went in, and then the flow came back. But the blame on all of the congestion around the area was immediately put on the low-traffic neighbourhood, when actually the temporary lights and the impact of those was probably the dominant cause. But nevertheless, that had such a political problem for that local authority. The LTN has come out. They're unlikely to be able to get any more in because of the negative impacts associated with that. Right, and then on top of that, we've converted 84 kilometres of our that's all of our Transport for London Road Network bus lanes. We've converted them to 24/7. In the initial stages, we converted 22,000 square kilometres of road space to pavement to allow people to be more socially distant, especially through busy town centre type locations. Lots of that, we've rolled it back now as social distancing becomes less of a requirement. It's still in some places though, you know, in locations like Brixton, where we've got a big bus stop build out there. You know, that's a location where it's really busy from a pedestrian perspective beforehand. You know, it's congested getting on and off the bus. We're still evaluating if it's the right thing to keep it there. You know, that change has meant that some bus stops have moved slightly, and there's obviously that interchange penalty for people, and we've got negative feedback on that. But the balance between the positive experience of getting on the bus at that greater space, you know, we're still evaluating the impact of that. A couple of years ago, we presented on Green Man Authority. We've put 20 new locations with Green Man Authority fitted in around the capital. We're still learning a lot from that. We've developed that further. We're really confident that we're putting that in the right place, and we're getting good benefits from that as well. But all of that adds up to an enormous amount of change, right? And I think the one benefit, the real positive, I think, from my perspective at Transport for London, is the way we organise and we sort our data. Right? I can see it a moment's notice. I can get my laptop in my bag, and I can see what the road performance is on the network at the current time. Throughout the pandemic, I can see from the chart at the top that flows in central London have been down. They're still down today as activity still hasn't returned, you know, into the very heart of the city. I can see that the A4 has had lower flow, lower disruption throughout the pandemic, you know, because Heathrow's not been as busy. But we can see that in the suburbs, in inner and outer London, flow has returned, and in some cases higher than levels seem pre-pandemic. You know, and the way we organise the data, the way that we've got that stored now and able to analyse it on a daily basis means we can be more efficient with our resource. I can direct my team out to locations that are experiencing those higher traffic flows, that are experiencing more disruption, especially from a bus perspective, and the type of techniques that Chris and Mike talked about earlier to extract those extra value from the network. You know, they can do that. But then also the graph at the bottom shows our cycling data. You know, so a collection of cycle detectors around central London. The pink lines show the comparative difference in cycle flow pre and post pandemic at the weekends, and you can see throughout the pandemic period, weekend cycling flow has been a lot higher. You know, over 200% higher in some weekends. And even the blue lines, you know, the weekday cycling flows, they've been remarkably resilient throughout the pandemic. You can see the two lockdown periods where weekday cycling flows dropped. You know, people weren't going into the office, especially in peak periods. But the rest of the pandemic, while cycling flows in the peak periods have been lower, as you know, fewer people have been travelling into the office, overall cycle levels across the weekdays have been good. They've been at or higher levels than they were pre-pandemic. Now, it's important, like when you look at that in contrast to the amount of people travelling by bus and by tube during that period, you know, the bus patronage levels have been significantly down, tube patronage levels have been significantly down, but cycling levels have been at or higher. So it's been a remarkably resilient way of travelling by travelling around in London, and we do feel, and there's a lot of confidence, especially politically in London, that cycling is growing and is about to be booming. Right, and finally, before I hand over to Golnaz, the other fabulous thing we've been doing, I think, in London is the way we're organising our data associated with all of these schemes that we're putting in. We've got a dashboard that collects all of the information for a particular area. The slide I've got on the screen here is Bishopsgate. You can see in the tabs down the side, I can go into that dashboard. I can pick Bishopsgate as a scheme. I can see all of the bus journey times for Bishopsgate, either along Bishopsgate, which is now a bus and cycle only corridor. I can see the bus journey times across it. I can see the traffic flows around the area and what impact it's had on traffic flows. I can see if we're growing cycling levels along there, if the scheme is doing what it's intended to do. I can also see the safety data as well. So I've got a one-stop shop to be able to understand everything that's going on with that scheme, and with a couple of clicks I can see what's happening on other schemes that we've implemented. Right? And what that's enabling us to do, again, is be extremely efficient with our resource. At the same time as we're being asked numerous questions by assembly members, by the mayor, by members of the public, by members of parliament on what's happening with all of these schemes. Why is bus route X really slow on this road? We're also getting pressure to deliver more. We're also getting pressure from the City of London to do schemes like a bank, adding pressure to understand what would happen if we changed these schemes slightly. And whilst we've got the ability to monitor all of these schemes through this dashboard, it's also important that we're still using our modelling tools, still using those design tools to be able to design what the next steps are. And at that point, I'll hand over to Golnaz to talk about that. But Golnaz first.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, everybody. In the next few slides, I'm going to briefly talk about what our team in modeling and visualization at TfL helped delivering the street space plan during the pandemic and what's coming next. So last year, when the pandemic hit, with the amount of changes with the street space and the changes that were happening at pace on our road network, everybody was interested in knowing and asking when and if we're going to break the network with all these changes. So as some of you may know from our last year's presentation, within our team, we try to help answer this question and also try to help people understand what all these schemes are, what the impact of all of these schemes are, and what's going to happen when we introduce more of these schemes on the road network. So we attempted to interface our operational network evaluator, one model, which is a highway assignment model, and integrated with our motion model, which is our model of London, model of travel in London, a variable demand tool, and try to really work out what's happening. So at that time, the very best available tool for us was our base model, which was calibrated to the Central London was calibrated to the 2006 data. And we took that model as our test bed, and we built our reference case model, which was meant to represent the network in summer 2020, where some of the street space schemes were already implemented. So we had over 300 schemes to potentially to code into our model. Reviewing and implementing all those in one model would have taken a couple of months. So we worked with Andy's team to narrow down the number of schemes which were more aligned with the strategic nature of our one model. And we ended up with the 90 schemes, still a huge number, and we coded them in a very brief time of 2 and 3 weeks, which gave us our reference case model at summer 2020 network. And then that was our test bed. We took that model and we built over 6 months, almost every week, we built tranche models, which we tested either new schemes or a different design for different design options to help answer some of our questions. On top of all the changes that were happening on the road network, as we all know, the demand levels also changed. So we had to adopt and we had to take into account into our forecast what's happening. So our we collaborated with our colleagues at City Planning, which use the motion model. It's a demand model. It takes assumptions on land use, economic, and network, road network, and it generates what's the total number of trips, what mode their trips gonna be using, and it also informs on the travel times, crowding, and congestion. So with that, we were able to develop two sets of demands. One was our pre-pandemic 2026 demand, which represented, which was already existing in our 2016 model, and with informing from our motion model, we developed an autumn 2020 post-COVID pre-vaccine demand and it helps us really get a wide range of results, so we could account for the uncertainty in the demand levels and the network. And so what are we doing now? This year, last year, from May to October, what TfL and our boroughs delivered on the street space were all using the temporary traffic orders, which are valid for only 18 months. And now we're reaching that end of cycle for those orders. And now we have to make a decision whether to extend those schemes through our experimental traffic orders, or remove the scheme, or make it permanent. So how are we helping with our models? Our one model can actually provide operational insight up to year 2026. And this is really helpful because we have a lot of transformational schemes that are coming, that are supposed to be on the street by 2026. And on top of that, we're introducing this street space scheme. So again, everybody is asking the question of what's going to happen with, can the network cope? So again, we adopted our modeling strategy, and this year we're using our future-based model, which is a 2026 model. It has all of our transformational schemes. These are committed schemes that are very likely to be implemented by year 2026. We're using that model as a test bed, and we're developing a reference case model. This reference case model is we are coding street space schemes that are very likely to stay on the street by year 2026, based on the monitoring data that we're collecting right now. And then we use that reference case, and almost every week we're doing again tranche testing with some of more impactful schemes, and we're coding them into our model to try to answer the question of whether they're going to work or not. And we're really testing the supply versus demand to see, with all these schemes, what's going to happen in the future. And lastly, from me, on the outputs that the one model can produce, these are the very range of the outputs that we have produced, we typically produce from our one model, but we have different audience from our modeling, from technical to non-technical, from deputy mayor to Andy's team. So we really had to provide different types of results and try to communicate with both technical and non-technical audience. Our results really shows the likely rerouting options, where the congestion and hotspots are happening, and really, as I mentioned, ultimately understanding the combined limits of our network capacity, where reduction in supply equals projected demand. So at the end of the day, we use these models, and we work very closely with Andy's team, who has a almost perfect knowledge of London's road network, and we try to understand the hotspots and really form our mitigation and monitoring strategy for each of the schemes that we want to either extend or make permanent. And back to Andy for the final slide.
So I'll wrap up. So look, we're hugely confident in the tools and the systems that we've got in London. They've coped remarkably well during the pandemic. we are not under any illusions that this is the end of the journey. Converting lots of these temporary schemes into either experimental or permanent is going to be a real challenge in London. We're already seeing legal challenge at lots of these schemes. Local boroughs are seeing legal challenge on their schemes. So the need for robust modelling, robust monitoring has never been so important in London. It's helping us to be able to defend why we're doing these schemes and actually prove that they are providing a benefit in London. And if they're not, the way we're writing these experimental traffic orders, the way we're documenting the monitoring strategies for them, mean that look, if they really don't work, if they're not delivering the sort of the pillars of the healthy street approach, then actually the right thing to do is either to tweak them or remove them, and we're open and honest to that. So yeah, super confident with what we're doing. It's been a trying time. I think as highway engineers, as traffic engineers, life would be boring if the road network was the same on every day and the traffic flow was the same every day. We need a bit of variety in our lives, and that's certainly what we've got at the moment. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Golnaz. Does anybody have any? We've just got some time for questions now. We've managed to catch up with our earlier time delay. So has anyone got any questions for the gentleman there in the middle, please? We'll just get the mic to you. If you could just let us know your name and where you're from, please, sir.
Thanks, Robert from Edinburgh. I think you mentioned, is it Green Authority, Green Man Authority? Can you just explain what that is, please?
So essentially, it's the flip of a traditional pedestrian crossing. Instead of that crossing resting on a green light for traffic, it rests on a green light for pedestrians. And we're being very careful with where we choose it, with where we implement them. They're not implemented on the A406. They're not implemented in trunk roads. There wouldn't be any point in that. But locations, I've got a good video on my phone if you want to show that afterwards. Outside London Bridge Station, it's very low traffic flow outside London Bridge Station, but lots of pedestrians, and the crossing there just resides on a green man. We're learning lots from it. So the configuration updates that we're doing at the moment will mean that after the last vehicle goes through the green signal and it reverts back to the green man, if no one's pressed the button, then we won't sound the audible. But if someone comes along, a visually impaired person comes along afterwards and presses the button, then the audible and the tactile cone will sound. So we're learning all the time from that. Other locations, that audible, maybe is a bit of an annoyance for people living nearby, and we've learned from that. But
that's standalone crossings rather than junctions.
Yes, standalone crossings.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the floor? No? Okay. I mean, my observation was that never let a good pandemic go to waste. You've obviously taken the opportunity to try and get some of the maybe some of the ideas or some of the dreams and wish lists that you'd never have had even got through as ideas before. That you've been able to not play on the network, but been able to try things out. So that must have been an element of fun involved in that as well. You'd never have expected or had the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been good. And we've been surprised by some of the things that our traffic signals have been doing. The locations like where you've got usually junction cycling around on quite a high cycle time, and like pedestrian crossings in the same region fixed to double against that. When the traffic flow dropped. Actually, we were getting lots of complaints that it takes too long to cross the road at that high cycle time junction when there was no traffic through it. But it was the fact that we'd forced the PEDs to double that was causing it to hold up. So we made lots of changes like that. We were able to do different things, be more innovative. And also the temporary nature of the schemes, the limitations from what we can design when you can't be intrusive onto the road network, that really challenged us as well. So,
to get that access, I mean, I wrote down 300 schemes by boroughs and by TfL.
Yeah, it's mental.
The administration of that alone scares me to whatever. And I have to thank you both. You made the point that you're used to presenting figures to a non-technical audience, so thank you for making it understandable for me as well. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to join me in thanking you both. Thank you very much.